You're listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Lehmiller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. Open relationships, polyamory, and consensual non-monogamy are all relationship styles that receive more attention today than ever before, yet they're still surrounded by stereotypes and misconceptions. Some people see them as the future of relationships, while others are highly skeptical. But behind all of these debates are real people trying to build relationships that fit their values, desires, and lives. Rather than arguing about whether non-monogamy is right or wrong, journalist Alyssa Shalaski's new book takes a different approach. Through a collection of deeply personal sex diaries, she invites readers inside the lives of people navigating open relationships and polyamory, including their motivations, hopes, insecurities, triumphs, and sometimes heartbreaks. In this episode, we're diving into those stories to better understand what draws people to non-monogamy, the many different ways that these relationships take shape, the challenges that people encounter along the way, and the lessons that these experiences can offer all of us, even those who have no interest in opening their own relationships. Ultimately, this isn't just a conversation about non-monogamy. It's a conversation about the many different ways that people seek love, intimacy, connection, and fulfillment. My guest is Alyssa Shalaski. Her popular New York Magazine column, Sex Diaries, is widely considered a cultural phenomenon and was developed into an HBO docuseries with Shalaski producing and starring. She is the author of Apron Anxiety, This Might Be Too Personal, and the new book, Sex Diaries, Real-Life Stories of Non-Monogamy and Polyamory. This is going to be another fascinating conversation that you won't want to miss. Stick around and we're going to jump in right after the break. Ever wondered how sex differs around the world? Come study it with me. Join me and Sexual Health Alliance for an immersive study abroad experience where we explore sexuality, psychology, culture, and science firsthand. You'll learn from international experts, travel to incredible places, and connect with students from around the globe. Since 2015, Sexual Health Alliance has been at the forefront of sexuality education, and you can be part of it. Join me, Shaw, and a global community of students for a transformative study abroad adventure. Later this year, we're heading to Berlin and Copenhagen, both of which are beautiful cities to experience and full of incredible learning opportunities. Spots are limited, so head to sexualhealthalliance.com to learn more and reserve yours. Come explore the world and the science of sex with me. So, Alyssa, over the years, you've collected countless stories about people's intimate lives through your Sex Diaries column, and now you've published a collection of those diaries in the form of a book. However, all of the diaries in this book deal with non-monogamy or polyamory. So I'm curious what made non-monogamy stand out as deserving of its own book. Was there something in the diaries that you kept seeing that convinced you that there's a bigger story to be told here?
To be honest, I wanted a Sex Diaries book, and I wanted there to be several E&M or poly stories in the book, but it was the powers that be that said, let's make it a book all about E&M. We keep hearing about it. It's a buzzword. It's trendy. And I had some hesitations because I thought that they would all sound alike. Mm-hmm. And this is my own failure in understanding the wider scope of things. But I was like, they're all going to be the same couple, with all the same words and polylingo, etc., who I love. I love those couples, but I didn't know if anybody wanted to read 50 of the same entries from them. But I was wrong. That was extremely narrow-minded of me. But besides that, I said, well, I'll do this book, but let's just make it people who are even interested in poly, who have had a fantasy about non-monogamy, who are strictly traditional, conservative, and monogamous, but have a friend who's let's just really make it all diaries that are sort of connected to E&M in some way, shape, or form. And that's when the book really started to sing for me, because, I think there's a little bit of everyone in all of these diaries. That makes me happy.
Yeah. And the world of ethical non-monogamy is so diverse. And, it's something that I didn't realize until I got into researching this topic somewhere around 15 or so years ago. And, one of the studies that we did was this large scale study where we recruited several thousand people who were in polyamorous relationships. And we asked them to describe the geometry of their relationship. Like, what does this actually look like? And that was one of the things that I found to be most fascinating, was that everyone's relationship structure looked a little bit different. Like, yes, there were some commonalities, like with triads and, V's and so forth. But, one of the most interesting ones that always stands out to me was this one person who described their relationship as an asterisk with a rectangle bolted onto it. And I was like, I had to think about that for a minute. I'm like, okay, I get what that means now, right? But it's just something where I think when people hear terms like open relationship or polyamory, they might have a particular idea in mind of like what that looks like or who's into it. But I think your book does a good job of really helping to paint this diverse picture, right? So based on the stories that you collected, who's practicing non-monogamy?
Well, there are a lot of the very evolved liberal Brooklyn or, Silver Lake or San Francisco Bay Area couples that are sort of stereotypical, but, they're couples who are sophisticated in the way that they think about love and sex and have other friends around who can sort of hold their hands in getting into it and take them to parties and so on and so forth. But there's so much more too. Like there's this throuple that's, I think, chapter 2 in the book, and they're married, all three, and they live in Florida. And they're such a happy family, 3 of them. And they're highly sexual. And they have, like you said, a diagram of who gets to sleep with who. That is like, it's like a beautiful mind of like who has sex this night while that one goes to Costco, who gets a romantic date this night while that one masturbates by the pool. I mean, it's very, but don't let the logistics fool you. Their life is really sexy and it really is very functional and it really works. That's one of the more extreme diaries, but I love that one. I find it super enchanting. And then like there's a very typical straight couple with a guy's a banker and the woman's like a stay-at-home mom who likes to surf, and he is worried that he can't stay monogamous. He's not going to cheat and he's not going to go and get drunk with his bros and get a blowjob. He's talking about it with his wife. It's a little bit of a controversial diary because there is a small sense that like, oh, is he pressuring her? Like that goes against the core tenet of poly life or E&M. But that's the reality of probably a lot of couples. And I didn't want to get rid of it just because I thought it maybe wasn't like the most ideal version of how to communicate these desires to your partner. To me, it's better than a secret. It's better than keeping that secret in and letting it rot.
Yeah, I've received lots of questions over the years about, how do I open up my relationship? And I've actually had some people who have written in who have said, how do I convince my partner to open up our relationship? I'm like, so convince is not the right word here, right? It's not about like trying to talk somebody else into it, to pressure them into it, to coerce them into doing it. It's, if you're going to open things up, it has to be from a place of something where everybody actually is on the same page and wants to do that. We've talked about this before on the show. There's this idea of polyamory under duress, where it's sort of like this coerced polyamory. And it just doesn't work out when people try to do that because you've got somebody who this isn't really aligned internally with who they are and what they really want to do. And so, yeah, I do think it's important to represent those different stories and different perspectives. I just wish that we all had better ability to communicate about what our wants and needs are, and that we could do that at the outset of our relationships, because oftentimes people end up in these monogamous relationships when monogamy wasn't really right for them in the first place. And then it becomes this thing of how do we make it work now if one partner wants monogamy and the other does not want monogamy?
This reminds me of the other night I was sitting on the roof of my building. It's an indoor roof, and I was doing work, and there was a couple on a first date, sort of on a separate section of the roof, but close enough that I could hear them. And she had brought up one of these games. I don't know if it was like the mating in captivity card game, but it was one of those you flip over and you ask questions. Oh, and this poor guy wanted to jump off the roof, let me tell you. But luckily they were drinking wine. And some of these questions were so personal, but so essential. It really was like, have you ever cheated? He was like, yeah. And she said, well, tell me about it, because I've been cheated on before and I can't go through that again. And they had this really honest conversation about why he stepped out and what it entailed and why he's done it multiple times, and which led to, do you think you could be in a monogamous conversation? And he said, to be honest, I'm not sure. I have the goosebumps. Another card they flipped was, are you straight? And her answer was, actually, I'm bisexual. I had a beautiful relationship with a woman. And he was like, damn, he didn't see. Anyway, sorry for the long story, but I walked away thinking they might actually make it. They might actually make it. They got a lot of important, tricky stuff out of the way. And I don't know why that's so revolutionary. Like, why aren't we telling people who we are and what we want? What's wrong? We'll talk about literally anything else, but not the fact that we're not sure if monogamy is right for us.
It blows my mind that, also that many people will get into a relationship and they'll just assume that it's monogamous, right? Without ever defining what monogamy even means or what infidelity would constitute. And then that's how people end up in situations where one partner thinks that they were cheated on, but the other person doesn't think that they cheated, but they never define the parameters of their relationship. And so I think all too often relationships are based on just these assumptions that we make about the other person and what they want and what's okay. And yeah, we could save ourselves lots of grief and heartache if we just had a few conversations in the beginning.
Or even if we just said, I don't know, because not everyone's like us. Yeah. Not everyone, not only like as able to express ourselves, but we have some language and we have a lot of experience under our belt. Just to say, I honestly don't know. I'll tell you, I honestly don't know if monogamy is for me. That's all I know right now is that I don't know. Mm-hmm. But we should be able to at least say that.
So it sounds like, based on the stories that you've collected, the people who are practicing non-monogamy and polyamory, they're a pretty diverse group of folks. And, they aren't always people who kind of fit the stereotypes that people have. And what we find in our research is that, people across the political spectrum, people who live in different states, different rural versus city, like you find people who are into ethical non-monogamy everywhere. And so I just think that that's an important point for people to recognize, is that it's not just this narrow sliver of the population who's into it. It really transcends lots of different demographic subgroups and so forth. But something else we see in the research on consensual non-monogamy is that there isn't just one thing that draws people to it. Different people can be into it for different reasons. So based on the stories that you collected, have you noticed any common themes in terms of what leads people to open their relationships, or any motivations that might have surprised you?
There's so many variations. I think for some people, it's differences in libido. There's one couple in the book where her partner is neurodivergent. They have different needs in the bedroom. Outside of the bedroom, they are completely in sync. There's so many different reasons that it works. Some people are doing it out of a real strong belief. It's almost like a political thing or a progressive thing. Some people were born that way. I have the 67-year-old diarist, who is my favorite person in the world, said at 8 years old, she knew that she would never be monogamous, never be married. And yet she wanted to have children. And she knew that at 8 years old, and she made it happen. I don't really have an answer for you because I can't. Do you have an answer?
Yeah, I think it is that it's very different for different people. For example, in terms of some of the other reasons people have told me why they've opened up their relationship or pursued polyamory, is that sometimes it's not just that there's a libido difference, it's a difference in the type of sex that they want. And so maybe their primary partner, they only have very vanilla sex with that person, but then they have very kinky sex with other partners that they might have. So sometimes it's about exploring, different facets of your sexuality, or, it could also be with regard to, you mentioned that you have a lot of participants who have provided diaries who are sexually fluid, right? And so it's a way to also explore attraction to people of a different sex or different gender. And then, there's also the non-sexual reasons that people are into it too, right? So people often assume that polyamory is all about just having more partners so you can have sex with more people. But it's also about just being able to connect with somebody else who might have, the same hobbies or interests that you do, because maybe your partner is just interested in other things. And so maybe it's the ability to have other partners that you can go out and have these other experiences with outside of the bedroom that you can't do with your partner. So this idea of diversified need fulfillment is often a big part of polyamory as well. Right.
And also the belief that we can love more than one. That's what polyamory is, loving many. That makes so much sense. Of course we can love more than one. What do we live? This is not a Disney fairy tale movie. We will and should and have love more than one person in our life. I think maybe I heard on your podcast when someone was saying, it's like when a parent's about to have another child, you find the love. You find a way to love that child, even though your first kid takes up your whole heart. Your second child will get your whole heart too. Trust me. Mm-hmm. Again, I don't know why that's only limited to children or friendships or siblings. We have the capacity to love many. And it's something that we should all celebrate and unleash.
Yeah, it's interesting that we have this idea in our culture that romantic love is finite, but platonic love is intimate, right? So you can love as many friends or as many family members as you want to, but you can only love one person. And so in terms of having romantic love, and so there's just sort of this weird disconnect where romantic love is seen as limited, but platonic love is seen as unlimited. And it just doesn't quite make sense.
I want to smash it all on its head. I'm so over all that. And I know people who met their partner, it's the first boyfriend or girlfriend in high school, and they are madly in love and they will die happy. They are the strongest, they've never been with anyone else. Like, I know these couples, they will only love each other. And there's nothing wrong with that. They're not missing out on anything. But not everyone is going to have that story.
Hey, Sex and Psychology listener, looking for another sex ed podcast that you're going to love? Then I recommend one of my favorites, Sex Ed with DB. Sex Ed with DB is a podcast about the sex ed you need, but probably never got before. Host DB has a Master of Public Health from Columbia University with expertise in sexuality and sexual and reproductive health. So rest assured that the show aims to bring you responsible, science-based information. Sex Ed with DB just launched its 14th season, which is focused on pleasure, ranging from the importance of intimacy to what happens in your brain during an orgasm. Join DB as she interviews experts in sex ed, answers difficult anonymous listener questions, and so much more. Use the link in our episode description to find a great starter episode, Maintaining Long-Term Relationships and Keeping the Spark Alive with therapist Dr. Lex Brown James. Check out Sex Ed with DB. So one thing I appreciate about your book is that it doesn't overly romanticize non-monogamy, right? It doesn't always work out perfectly. Sometimes it's complicated and messy, just like monogamous relationships can be complicated and messy. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about maybe some of the stories about the diversity of the experiences that people have when they start exploring non-monogamy.
Sure. I had several diarists who were very quick to tell me that they are happily ethically non-monogamous and will be for the rest of their lives, but that they still experience profound jealousy. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you've heard the same.
Yep.
And I thought that was so cool that they were honest about that, because I think that's a lot of people's default stop when they hear about E&M. I'm way too jealous. I could never do that. I'd be so scared they'd fall in love with someone else. And it's like, okay, yeah, you can have all those feelings. There's that. There's also the logistics and the stress of it all. Sometimes it sounds, for a lot of these couples, it's like just annoying. It can get annoying when your life is busy and you're trying to manage your poly lifestyle in an ethical way that revolves around intense communication. I think it can be a lot. I also think that there's people in my book, I won't say who are doing it for the wrong reasons. Mm-hmm. Maybe just one who's doing it because they want to seem super sexual for their partner, and maybe it's not right for them deep down. So no, it's hardly perfect. It's a lot of work. The couples who are doing it successfully, it's a lot of work and a lot of communication. There's no other way to put it. I used to say, like, what happened to secrets? Like, secrets are so sexy. Are we entering a world of E&M where we're not going to be able to just keep something like deep down inside? Just, to me, that I think that's a kink for me, honestly. I like a secret. But you can have secrets as long as you tell your partner, my kink is secrets. Do you know what I mean? You still have to be upfront about what's going on. So no, I don't think it's easy. I don't think it's always romantic. Certainly not flawless. We're all human.
Yeah. And, that is my one concern, is that I think we oftentimes only hear about this overly idealized version of polyamory and ethical non-monogamy, where it's sometimes presented as jealousy doesn't exist and everybody's just happy and loves one another and so forth. And the reality is like, yeah, maybe some of those relationships are very happy, healthy, functional, and there is no jealousy. But there's also the complicated, messy side of things too. And I think it's just important to recognize that so that for people who are entering the world of non-monogamy, that they can be prepared that they're going to experience challenges along the way. And jealousy and time management are the two biggest things that I hear about from people. I'm reminded of a conference I went to some years ago where I arrived at I was on the same flight as a friend of mine who was polyamorous, and we both shared a taxi to the hotel and then checked into our rooms and said we'd meet up at the bar in a little bit. And so I get down to the bar and my friend doesn't come down until like an hour and a half or 2 hours after me because he had to call like his other 3 partners and check in with all of them. And it was just it can be exhausting. There's this time management component when you're dealing with multiple relationships at the same time. And I think that's something that sometimes people aren't always necessarily prepared for, is how you're going to manage the logistics of multiple partners simultaneously.
Yeah. I went on a podcast and I was like, or you can scrap all that and just, don't communicate. And I literally called the podcaster afterwards and I said, please take that out. I misspoke. I cannot think of a way to do this based on the hundreds of poly couples I've spoken to. I cannot think of a way to do this where communication is not at the core of the entire relationship.
So, we talked about some of the challenges that can come up in E&M, but there are also lots of people who are practicing ethical non-monogamy and are absolutely thriving. So I think you mentioned that, there's a story about a throuple that you have in your book where everything is, kind of working out really well for them. So can you also tell us about some folks for whom consensual non-monogamy just really seems to work and who are living their best lives?
Sure. The people living their best lives in my book or in the diaries are having great sex. I'll be honest. They're having a lot of sex. And it's, to me, these are the people who are living their best lives. There's a lot of pleasure and it's real pleasure. It's pleasure that is specific to their bodies and their needs and what they're going through in this specific moment. They're adventurous. They're happy with the way they designed their life. It probably wasn't easy, but they found their sweet spot. And they're happy. It gives me chills because you don't see it often. You really don't. Honestly, most of the people in my book are happier than the majority of people in my day-to-day mom life. So yeah, it's a combination of they are living their authentic lives with people they deeply respect. And I think that's a big component of it too. Not only do they lust for their partners, like them a lot, they're best friends, they're very much in tune with their partner's feelings, reactions, sensitivities, vulnerabilities. It goes back to the talking. You kind of have to strip it all down. And I think that this sense of responsibility to their partner's well-being is really beautiful and creates these deep bonds with their lovers in the way that a lot of married people don't even have. They're happy.
As you were speaking there, I was wondering, even for people who are monogamous and have no interest in opening up their relationship, is there anything that they can learn from these stories that they can take away from them in terms of how they might build happier and healthier relationships for themselves? I know you mentioned, the communication and vulnerability. So what is it that you think monogamous folks might be able to take away from this that, could also apply to them in terms of building a happier love life?
I think monogamy is a choice. It's nice to make that choice with your partner. Don't be monogamous just because you're expected to be or because you guys never took the time to talk about it. Talk about it. Is this working for us? Probably is. Great. But at least it's on the table. Then you sort of can live in your relationship with more intention. I am monogamous to you because you're the only person I want to sleep with. You're my priority. You're all I have time for. You're all I have the capacity, whatever it is. You add a little bit of intention and an extra layer of closeness or intimacy to these conversations. It doesn't take much. I'm not saying you have to talk about the deepest, darkest fantasy that you masturbate to every few nights. You can keep, it's okay. There's not one way to be open with your partner, but just to say, I'm choosing monogamy with you, and it's because it's what I want. Is it what you want? I think it's kind of like, it's so simple, but I think it's kind of like a beautiful way to evolve.
Yeah. And, this has me thinking about how in a lot of long-term monogamous relationships, we come to think that our partner is having sex with us kind of because they have to, right? Because we're monogamous, there's no other choice. And when you make it explicit that, no, I'm choosing this, I'm choosing you, I think that can go a long way toward also helping your partner to feel desired, right? Because this is something that Dr. Marta Miena talked about on the show several episodes ago, where she was talking about how the desire sometimes doesn't feel real in these long-term monogamous relationships because it feels like your partner has to choose you because they can't go anywhere else. And so that's often why desire kind of falls away, is because we don't feel like our partner truly wants us anymore. And so to the extent that you can make it explicit, as you were saying, that, I choose this, I choose you, I think that can kind of help sort of cut through that and help to create that foundation for feeling mutual desire in the relationship.
I totally agree. I also think to say, let's talk about, like, just for fun, let's talk about what it might look like to be non-monogamous. Sometimes a conversation like that can be so sensual and can bring you straight back to your partner. You have to believe in yourself as a couple enough to know that you can handle those kinds of conversations.
And I think engaging in those kinds of thought experiments can be very useful for, any kind of sexual fantasy. Like, let's imagine, like, if you've never practiced anything kinky before, like, what might it be like if we tied each other up or so forth? And so it's, again, just sort of having those conversations. It's a way of bringing some novelty into the discussion, into the relationship. And we know that novelty is also very key to keeping passion alive. But also, maybe you'll find that, hey, you have some shared interest in trying something that's new and different, and maybe you explore some new sexual territory afterwards.
Exactly. Or that one's not for me, but wow, he really wants to suck my toe, or whatever it is. He really wants to meet up at a hotel bar and pretend we're strangers. Sure, I'm game. These conversations don't have to be scary.
So after immersing yourself in these stories about non-monogamy and collecting all of these sex diaries, how do you hope people think differently about non-monogamy after reading this book? What do you hope that readers take away from this collection of sex diaries?
I mean, I would love if everyone was just a lot less judgmental towards it, to deal with the fact that it's everywhere and it's growing. Deal with it. Sexuality and monogamy, it is rapidly evolving, and these conversations are becoming more and more expansive. And it's not just for the progressives, and it's not just for the freaks or whatever. It's what the world is today, and that's a good thing. So embrace it. Sex and monogamy is so individualistic. It sounds like a canned line or something, but it's really not. It's going to look completely different for every single one of us. So I don't understand why we're all trying to fit into the same model. It's not as binary as one thinks, where you have to be totally kinky at a sex club, tied up, in bondage, or happily married vanilla living in the suburbs. Forget all that. It's completely up to you, up to your desires, your circumstance, your partner. Just stop trying to fit into a box. It's not going to work. Historically, it hasn't worked. So there's so many variations of all of this stuff. It's deeply personal and deeply unique. Revel in it.
Yeah. And I think, another thing too that people can take away from your work is that, in these stories, we also see that non-monogamy runs on a spectrum, right? Where you've got some people who are perfectly monogamous, other people who might have multiple lovers at the same time. But then you also have some people who are monogamous. They're somewhere in the middle where the relationship is open in some ways or at some times, or maybe it vacillates between these periods of being open and closed. And so monogamy or non-monogamy isn't going to look the exact same for any two people. That's why it's also important, I think, for us to figure out what type of relationship structure is going to work best for you. And there isn't just one particular choice or model or direction you can take. It's all about kind of exploring and trying different things on and seeing what fits you best.
Absolutely. It's all so much fun. It's really, from my point of view, I get to talk to these diarists who are living their best lives for the most part sexually, and they're having a blast. I wish that for everyone in my life.
I wish that too. And I think everybody who reads your book is going to have a blast. So thank you so much for this amazing conversation, Alyssa. It was a pleasure to have you here. Can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work and get a copy of your new book?
Sure. Well, they can follow me on Instagram. It's at Alyssa Shalasky. Kind of a mouthful, but you'll find me. And then the book is called Sex Diaries. It's based on my popular New York Magazine column called Sex Diaries. Google Sex Diaries and you'll get it all.
Great. And I'll be sure to include links to all of that in the show notes. Thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate having you here.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a Sex and Psychology Premium subscriber to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Lehmiller and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.